Demolition rarely, if ever, makes the national news. When it does, it's often for all the wrong reasons. A project that didn't go according to plan, an accident on site, an injury, or worse still, a fatality. These moments, though incredibly rare, become the headlines, the narrative, and the public perception. And yet the thousands of successful, meticulously planned demolitions that occur every year, they remain invisible, unnoticed by the public eye, as though they never happened. If you listen to some environmentalists, they'd have you believe that demolition is the spawn of Satan himself, a hydraulic hammer smashing through any hope for a sustainable future. And politicians, always eager to appease the green lobby, seem intent on pushing demolition further and further into the margins, framing it as wasteful and archaic, a relic of a bygone era rather than a vital part of modern development. Even within the construction industry, demolition's closest cousin, it's seen as little more than a bit part player, a necessary evil to endure before the so-called real work begins. They build up, demolition tears down, and in their eyes, it's as simple as that. But those in the demolition industry know better. Demolition is no mere sideshow. It's a highly skilled profession, one of precision, expertise, ingenuity. And demolition engineers, they're not just players, they're in a league of their own. Let's start with the safety record. You won't see this on the evening news, but the demolition industry's health and safety performance consistently outshines that of construction. Yeah, you heard that right. Despite the inherent risks of demolition work, the industry's safety standards are higher. And that's not by accident, if you'll pardon the pun. It's the result of an unwavering commitment to planning, training, and discipline. In demolition, mistakes are not an option. The margin for error is razor thin, and the stakes really couldn't be any higher. And what about the environment? The critics would have you believe that demolition is all about waste, that it's sending tons of rubble to landfill with every project. But that really couldn't be further from the truth. Modern demolition is a masterclass in sustainability. Demolition doesn't knock buildings down, it deconstructs them, salvaging materials for reuse and recycling. Concrete is crushed and repurposed. Steel is melted down and reborn. Timber is reclaimed. In many projects, upwards of 95% of a structure is diverted from landfill. Can we say the same about the new shiny buildings that replace them? And then there's the technical challenge. People often assume that taking something down is easier than putting it up. After all, creation is an art, while destruction is just brute force, right? Wrong. Taking down a structure, especially in a crowded urban environment, is an engineering feat of the highest order. Every building, every bridge or chimney stack is a puzzle, a unique combination of materials, history, and quirks that must be carefully understood before a single beam is touched. A demolition professional must have a working knowledge of structural engineering that rivals that of any architect. They must understand how materials age, how they interact, and how they'll respond under stress. Demolition men and women don't just study blueprints, they study the building's life story. Was it built with asbestos insulation? Was it reinforced with techniques no longer in use? Was it modified in ways that weren't recorded? These are the questions that have to be asked and answered before the first crack of concrete. In demolition, health and safety aren't just boxes to tick. They're a way of life. Every move is calculated to minimize and mitigate risk, not just to our own teams, but to the surrounding community. Working next to active railways, hospitals, schools, and offices, all in a day's work for a demolition crew. And the environmental challenges don't stop with recycling. Demolition professionals are stewards of the air, custodians of the water and the soil around them, working tirelessly to prevent contamination. And while legislation surrounding these issues seems to change faster than the weather, demolition keeps up, adapting and innovating to stay ahead of the curve. And let's not forget about waste management. Demolition deals with the aftermath, the detritus of decades. Old wiring, decayed insulation, hazardous materials, it's all part of the job. Demolition doesn't just manage waste, it reimagines it, turning yesterday's buildings into tomorrow's resources. This is a profession that demands versatility. These are not just demolition engineers, they're structural experts, environmental scientists, logistics coordinators, and legal navigators. They're problem solvers, innovators, and occasionally miracle workers. And yet, how often do we hear their work celebrated? How often do we see it recognised for the skill, care, and dedication it requires? Sure, demolition isn't glamorous. It's not the stuff of glossy magazine spreads or ribbon cutting ceremonies. They're not the ones posing for photos when the project is done. But without demolition, those new skyscrapers, bridges, and homes wouldn't exist. Demolition clears the way for progress, often quite literally. And perhaps that's why demolition feels so misunderstood. They're the ones who clean up the past so others can build the future. It deals with the old, the worn out, the forgotten, the structures that have outlived their usefulness. And in doing so, they clear the space for something new to emerge. There's a poetic irony in demolition work. It destroys to create, it dismantles to renew, and in doing so, it carries both the weight of history and the promise of tomorrow. So the next time someone tells you that demolition is a necessary evil, think again. Think of the skill it takes to bring down a skyscraper without a single scratch to the surrounding buildings. Think of the environmental foresight required to recycle 95% of a structure's materials. Think of the lives saved by the industry's commitment to safety. Demolition professionals are not just wreckers. They're visionaries, engineers, and guardians of a world in transition. They deserve more than fleeting headlines when things go wrong. They deserve recognition for the countless times that things go right. Ultimately, demolition is not the end, it's the beginning. And it's about time the world saw it that way.